And it was just the briefest moment. It was like a second, as quick as it was to close my eyes and open them. I just turned to my partner who was sitting next to me, and I just was like, God is real.
Hey everybody, welcome to Catholics in Ordinary Time. This week's episode, I think you're really going to enjoy. I get to sit down and talk to Jake McEwan. Jake McEwan is a young adult here in Spokane, and he's been on quite a journey that I don't think is that unusual for a lot of really thoughtful, bright Catholics as they try to move into their faith and try to answer some of those really deep questions about God's existence. He takes a road that is unexpected, at least to me, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Welcome, Jake. Nice to have you on this podcast. Really good.
Thank you. Yeah. I have done some thinking since we met about kind of, I don't know, I guess how I position myself within this this conversation that we're having. But yeah, just kind of ready to see where it takes us.
Fantastic. So good. Well, we'll start with a few background questions and then move into the larger conversation that we were kind of already having a little bit of. So remind me, I think I know this answer, but you're baptized, cradle Catholic.
Yes, cradle Catholic. Went through baptism as an infant. Did confirmation in second grade. Yeah,
the whole 9 yards, and then you went
the whole 9 yards.
And then, as I recall, you went to elementary school Catholic, and then high school Catholic, and then college Catholic.
Exactly. Yeah. I went to Noachius grade school, then went to Gonzaga Prep, and then from there I went to Boston College. And so Catholic through and through.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Education wise, yes.
Yeah. Okay. There would be other pieces that would come in. So you did that, and both of your parents are Catholic and come from Catholic families.
Not exactly. My mom, yes, came from a Catholic family, Irish Catholic family. Her grandfather actually was from Ireland.
Oh, okay.
The Catholic identity on her side of the family is also very much tied into our ethnic background. He fought in the Civil War. Like, he was part of the IRA, so that kind of Irish Catholic identity and almost kind of that tension with the Protestants. It was very much like, we are Catholic.
Yeah, right. And we will actually shoot guns about it.
Yeah, we'll get feisty about it. My dad, on the other hand, grew up in kind of a religious household, and however, he was from the region, so he went to school at Gonzaga, and while he was studying abroad in Florence, he was actually baptized and decided to convert. He had the really cool experience of actually traveling to the Holy Land and being baptized in the Jordan River by Father Steve Cooter. So, oh
my God, the drama, the drama. That's great. That sounds great. That's really interesting. And so,
go ahead.
And when you were in the middle of all that, did you were just kind of lockstep Catholic? Like, yeah, sure. Just doing your Catholic thing?
Yeah, there wasn't really. It was interesting because, we were totally aware of other faith traditions and had, people I went to school with, family, friends who were not Catholic, but there was just never a questioning about it. Both my parents were Catholic. They were both very committed to the church. So yeah, we just kind of showed up, and that was our gig, not really questioning it too much. Also, because my parents, went to Gonzaga and we, stayed in Spokane, the Jesuit community was a big part of our social life in a lot of ways. My parents went to school with people who became Jesuits. So there wasn't even that sense of that's the church that we're a part of. It was very much more like, this is just our community. These are our friends, there's Tom Lamana up at the pulpit. It was great having meatballs with him, a couple days ago. Like that, it was just very casual in that way.
Yeah. And you're the oldest, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And whether that made a difference or not, but your family may have shifted as it went along as well. I know that oldest children often have a different version of the family than their younger siblings.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny you bring that up because as I'm thinking about it right now, I think that did have an impact on my relationship with my faith, being the older brother and particularly having a much younger sibling. I think even when I started having kind of deeper questions about God or religion or how I identify with that in terms of like authenticity, there was kind of that older sib. I don't know if there's an expectation that was like put on me or something that I just kind of adapted, but I didn't want to show any of my questioning or concerns about the faith to my younger siblings. Like as far as they're concerned, like I am like, we're good, we're in it, because I didn't want to disrupt that part of their experience. Like I think I kind of had some awareness that like, hey, just because you're having your own misgivings about this doesn't mean that, your younger brother needs to be kind of having those sort of philosophical questions as a
Yeah.
5-year old.
And how old are you now? And how old's Ned?
I am 35 and my brother is 25.
25.
So
Okay. Yeah.
10-year gap.
Yeah.
And my sister and I are essentially Irish twins. She's like 14 months behind me. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And so these misgivings, were you like a happy-go-lucky Catholic kid, and then suddenly the devil tempted you away, or what? How do how do you describe kind of what happened?
Yeah. This is kind of crazy to think about. Um, I think what started happening for me, weirdly, this kind of got brought up, I think, when September 11th happened.
Hmm.
So, September 11th happens and it's like, who did this to us? Right. And over time, it, becomes clear that, there's this really conservative sect of Islam that's operating out of Afghanistan, and there's a lot of hate and, as a result, terrorist attack, right? But society's response to that, to meet that hate with so much hate, was particularly towards Muslims, and kind of feeling that like the Christian nation versus kind of the infidels sort of narrative breaking out, like something just really on a deep level did not settle with me.
How old were you at that point? I could do the math.
I would have been 12, 13.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that started for me a deeper questioning just about like what other faiths look like and what other faiths believe in. And in a way that I don't think I had previously, because I was just kind of like, oh, like other people can have their opinions, but we've got, the Catholic Church, like we got to figure it out. We've been doing this for 3,000 years, right? We got our catechism. It's really thick. So, in looking at some of these other traditions, and I think looking at more of like the nuance of it, like particularly like in investigating like the Muslim faith, like kind of learning more about like the Shiite traditions, like the Sufi tradition, the more like kind of mystical contemplative aspects to it, I realized like, hey, these folks are believing very similar things to us. There's a heart in here that like I feel connected to. So at that point, I really started having a much more ecumenical view of just God and spirituality and religion at that point. And I think that kind of softened my attachment to Catholicism, because it was like, okay, well, we all as a people here on this earth are having like a spiritual experience, and maybe Catholicism doesn't have, the claim on what's right and true. And so that just kind of like softened things for me. And I think I kind of stepped away from maybe the more traditional dogmatic Catholicism that I grew up with at that point.
Hmm. So that's at 12 and 13. So as you head into high school, then it sounds like you're not to contrast with a lot of stupid kids, but it sounds like you're an intelligent person at that point, as self-reflective and with a lot of good questions. and you went forward and continued to ask those questions in that vein, and you continue to have kind of an open aperture to different faiths.
Yeah, and I even got into like towards the end of high school, I really started getting into the Baha'i faith. Like that was something that I almost reached a point of like reaching out to, some of their leaders to kind of see what like the process would be of like joining that
Tell me
sort of
more
church.
about what it is about Baha'i that captured you.
The Baha'i faith, what really struck me about them was their ecumenical perspective. This idea of kind of, and I'm speaking from like what I read a while ago. It's
Mm-hmm.
been a while since I've been in it, but just kind of the perpetual revelation that it didn't end with Jesus.
Oh, okay.
It didn't end with Muhammad. Like there's been other great teachers along the way. They even kind of talk about like the Buddha and the way that factored into it, and even some of like the Hindu tradition, and really speaking to like the fact that revelation's alive, that
Mhm.
there's like a direct relationship that God has with man, and it's not over yet. Um, and they're just so radically accepting of all these other faiths. Like they're kind of like, hey, we have this interpretation, and also like it's almost like an umbrella interpretation. It's not really saying that any of these faiths are wrong. It's just saying that these different faiths are like evolutions of one another.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that really aligned with kind of that broader like universalist perspective that I'd started
Yeah.
developing.
Yeah.
I even remember at one point I was like, "Oh, I'm going to get a tattoo of like all of the different symbols of the different faiths, like to kind of like really buy into that." And I didn't get that tattoo, but
I think maybe a better thing is maybe just a coexist bumper sticker. Don't you think? You could
that
just
when they came out with that bumper sticker, I was like, "Oh man, that's exactly right." It
that's the
really
tattoo I
resonated.
wanted.
Yeah, right, right.
Great. And so you, just to back up a little bit, were you one of the families that socially and culturally and Sunday practice, you're Catholic, but was there, what was the day-to-day practice like? Rosary prayer? What were you doing?
Mm,
What was the expectation or the family prayer sort of life outside of Mass?
yeah. There was a so I mean I think this a lot of my spirituality and experience of religion happened at the dinner table.
Hmm. No,
um
no.
you know we'd wake up for breakfast, and there would sometimes be like a small prayer during like the morning, especially if there was something kind of like happening in the family, right? It's like, hey, like we're going to say an intention for this relative that's ill, or this big thing that's coming up.
Hmm.
So like always saying kind of grace before meal, particularly at dinner time. We all knew the prayer, and it was kind of like you'd sit down and be like, okay, Jacob, you're going to say the prayer tonight. And it's like, oh, shoot, okay. You know, Here I go. Um, so there was that component. There was a sense of like learning the rosary. That was something that was taught to us by my mother and my father. And that was something that we would be sent to when we were distressed or having problems. If there was a heavy thing going on, sometimes mom would say like, hey, have you thought about like saying some rosary about it or like praying about it? Really, helping us remember that like that's something that's available to us and something that we can like dip into in the day to day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Beyond that, though, kind of like I was talking about, the Catholic community here in Spokane, kind of just being our community.
Yeah.
You know, any sort of like death, wedding, funeral, just about any event that you could imagine, even like the pig roast at like the family friend's house, like there would be a priest there that would say something.
Yeah.
So, and there was a sense that like when a death happened, if there was a wake or if there was like a big wedding or even like, one of the relatives is getting confirmed, like everybody's there.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like, oh, am I going to make time for this thing? It was like, no, that's something that we all show up for as
Mm-hmm.
like community of faith and as a family to really support and encourage, that participation in that part of our lives.
Yeah. That's good to hear that outlined that way, because what I'm hearing is like there's really something to belong to, that it isn't your family has to create it on your own. You can actually be part of it as it's going on around you, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that was maybe even part of what influenced, I think, my parents really teaching us these different things, and really trying to encourage us to explore them on our own, because there's almost like a cultural literacy component
Hmm.
of, like, this is what everybody else is doing.
Hmm.
Everybody else is doing the rosary at the wake. So, like, when we show up there, like, we want to be able to do be there as a member, that is
Right.
fully belonging in that.
Right. And these are the markers for that.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
So you went to a Catholic high school, and was that Catholic high school just more of the kind of cultural fabric, or was it a kind of an experience of increased faith or opportunity to question it?
So, yeah, I mean, going to a Catholic high school, kind of like I was describing the community component, like, we have the regular masses, we have, the Marian Mass, where everybody's family showed up and everybody would dress up for it. It was kind of like our big mothers, grandmothers event. So there was a sense that, like, I hate to say, we've heard this phrase, this the C and E Catholic, right?
Hmm.
There was kind of, I guess, like the light version of Catholicism that you could engage in, which was almost like the required stuff that, like, everybody went to. It was like, okay, it's like All Souls Day, we have the old school mass, like, you can't be caught hiding in, like, the study hall, you have to go to mass. Oh, it's mass day, like, don't show up in your shorts, like, make sure you dress up, you're going to get sent to the dean's office. So there was that, which you couldn't really escape from. But then there was the deeper component. Like, there was the weekly Wednesday mass that wasn't required. That was like an option if you didn't want to go to study hall, so you could participate in that. There was also a pretty incredible retreat program. We have a search program at
Hmm.
Gonzaga Prep, which is still going, uh,
Hmm.
and that is something that, I can't remember if it was required for everybody. Um, but that was a really powerful experience. It was
Hmm.
very experiential. It was very much about, like, your own relationship with God, with spirit, and very contemplative in that way. And I mean, that's kind of different, I think, than what a lot of folks get out of their diocesan experiences. To have that, I mean, very Jesuit informed, like, being with the story of Christ,
Hmm.
having your own personal response to it, and seeing how that experience of connection can show up in connection with others,
Hmm.
living that out. So as a result of that, I actually wound up getting more involved in our search program, because there's an option then to, like, as a senior later in high school, actually facilitate and lead the retreat.
Right.
So, where there is that kind of just surface level, like, I'm just kind of checking my boxes as a Catholic at a Catholic high school, there's that opportunity for deeper experience. And I definitely leaned into that. Because even though I was questioning maybe, like, the magisterium of Catholicism, there was never, and I kind of talked with you a little bit about this, like, as we were preparing for this interview, but there was, like, never, like, a total loss of my connection with the divine, or with that
Hmm.
question of God. Like, there was definitely some agnosticism. Like, I don't think atheism is even the right word, maybe just like severe cynicism that
Yeah.
broke up. But there was a sense that, like, this is a really valuable thing and I wanted to be a part of it, whatever that looked like.
As you've left Spokane, and now you've come back, but as you were left Spokane and you were in Boston, I think
Yeah.
you're in Boston.
Boston.
Uh, did you spend some time? Did people often think when you said you were Catholic from Spokane, they would you think that they would come to conclusions about a very conservative kind of Catholicism, and the one you described seems pretty easygoing, pretty open, pretty warm. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it is. It was really interesting actually going to school in Boston. Boston's a very Catholic town, very Irish town. And so Boston College also attracted a lot of kids from other Jesuit schools.
Mm-mm.
So there was probably a false sense of like this kind of like we're this homogenous community of Catholic kids that all like kind of graduated from similar like preparatory schools and like have like similar like socioeconomic backgrounds. So I think, my friends from Georgetown Prep and Gonzaga College High School were really confused by me because I was like ostensibly from, yeah, Eastern Washington on the Idaho border, I would talk with people about like shooting guns and driving up to the Indian reservation, and they're like, where is this person from? But then for me to talk about my experience of faith and religion, tip my hat honestly to the Jesuits that worked at Prep. Like they really taught us, like I think a progressive, very welcoming form of Catholicism that honestly wasn't the experience of some of my peers who came very much with kind of a more dogmatic, conservative perspective that kind of shook me a little bit because I was like, I thought that I was the person coming from like kind of the backwater part of the world. But then you're showing up with these kids who are kind of like striking their chest during like the prayers, and you're like, I didn't even know that was a part of Mass. Like, I thought that got like, 86 after Vatican II, but okay, here we are.
Yeah, right.
So,
I found it startling when I moved to New York, is that for some reason I thought that culture and, well, I guess culture uh, was kind of like a stone hitting a lake and then concentric circles going out. And so, like, if you were in New York, then it'd be like really high culture. And the further you got out from New York, the less cultured it would be. Was not prepared at all that the rock drops in Manhattan and then it just stops when it gets to New Jersey. Just like it's just not built that way. You're like, because those people in big cities can be incredibly provincial, which I was not prepared for at all. I was like, wait a second, I'm from the West, and you find people that are very, very well, certainly cultured. No surprise, but the reverse as well. You probably found that in Boston because it can be very provincial as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, and kind of like I mentioned, like it's a very Irish Catholic town, so we have some like very old Catholic families where it's like grandma's still around and grandma expects things to kind of
sure, yeah,
she loved the Latin Mass, she misses that, and the kids hear that. So it was, yeah. And I think that I had that kind of false conception, like, oh, I'm going to Boston, Athens of the North. Like it's going to be super progressive and like liberal. And it was like, oh, Boston's not exactly that way. And it's funny because I even now talking with people having moved back, I'm like, when I was in Boston, I noticed that was pretty conservative. And like my friends from New York are like, hell yeah. That's right. Like, you're crazy. You didn't know that? Like, okay.
No, I didn't. So you go to Boston, and I think you eventually, or maybe immediately, started studying philosophy. Is that correct?
Oh, yes.
Whose idea was
philosophy
this?
Trap. So, yeah, I initially went to school and, kind of per what I was describing earlier, this kind of ecumenical perspective, I really got into like international studies and kind of looking at like the socio-political landscape of international relations. And, I really thought that that'd be cool to like develop like cultural awareness and cultural attunement and be able to like use that in a political way. But a big part of studying political science is, of course, your core philosophy class at a Catholic college. So I went to go do my core philosophy class and just fell in love with it. It was fun to talk about, the state of international politics and all that, but like the ideas underlying kind of these policies and like where those came from and why people believed those sort of things and like what was being valued in these different schools of thought, and just the history, like kind of like being able to look at like how humans have evolved in terms of like how they think about themselves. Like that was really cool to me. So I got sucked into philosophy. And then I was taking my core theology class, and a very similar thing happened. I was like, okay, I'm going to go do my like core philosophy theology class. It's going to be just like Gonzaga Prep. Like, I've taken one of these before. But to be engaging with questions about God and philosophy at like at that higher collegiate level. And that was just something that I had been missing that I didn't really
Mm.
realize. And I didn't even think I never would have in like the wildest, foggiest part of myself thought that that would be what I would major in. But yeah, after taking both of those classes and also like honestly getting a lot of positive feedback from my professors, kind of saying like, hey, like you have like this is a gift, like you should really pursue this. I did decide to double major in philosophy and theology. So
Mm. Hmm. Well, it's good when you have nothing to fall back on. I think, and I should know. I have those degrees. Uh, yeah, that's cool. So, history of ideas. It sounds like intellectual history is really, really what got you
well,
going.
and it's funny you make the joke about nothing to fall back on because that is, that was something that, kind of came up. And also my peers at the time, once again, my peers from these like very nice East Coast establishments, they're like, well, I'll study philosophy, but I'm also going to study business economics so that I have like an actual job that I can go do. And I was like, well, that's a great idea, but like I'm just going to fully invest in kind of just metaphysical. So we'll see what
Hmm.
happens.
Well, there's always law school, Jake. There's always
There's
law
always lots.
school. Ugh.
Or the next thing that happened is I started sneaking over to the Jesuit residence late at night and attending discernment meetings.
Oh, right. In a
Um,
disguise.
yeah,
Yeah.
like kind of like because I was kind of a little bit of a rowdy college student, so I think my friends were like, "Really, you're gonna go like talk about maybe becoming a priest?" And I was like, oh, "Like that's where I'm at right now."
Yeah.
Because even though there was this, for lack of a better word, very worldly part of myself. Once again, like the spiritual questions always remained. So that was a big part of my college experience was kind of like, you know, having fun as a college student and just getting into the things that college students get into.
Sure.
But then also very deeply considering like a priestly vocation at the
Yeah.
end of all.
What was the liturgical worship life like at BC, and was that helpful or kind of inconsequential for you?
Yeah. It was, I think, similar to what I experienced at Gonzaga Prep. There was, once again, kind of the surface level, like things that everybody went to. Like we had a mass for, I think it's convocation when we all first got there. There was like a mass, and all the parents were invited, so everybody shows up with their parents, and that was kind of the thing to do. Um, but there wasn't that like requirement that existed in high school. Like nobody was going to hunt you down if you wanted to skip mass.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, there was a lot more opportunity if you were interested in exploring faith to do that on a daily basis. So, for example, my residence hall had a chapel in the basement of it, and I think there were multiple residence hall with chapels in the basement of it. So we had like it was like every other day there was a mass down there. So if I was having a hard day, and I was like, oh shoot, okay, it's 5 o'clock. I can pop down and go do mass.
Mm-hmm.
That I would do that quite a bit. Also, and I don't know if this is true to other Catholic colleges or Jesuit campuses, but we had a church on site, which I believe served as like the parish school, like the parish church for like the Chestnut Hill area, like St. Ignatius. So there was kind of like an open public mass happening on campus almost daily.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of similar to St. Al's over here at GU.
Yeah.
And also we had St. Mary's Chapel, which was, attached to the Jesuit residence. And that was also a public space, and there was daily mass there. So there was every day an opportunity to go to some sort of mass.
Yeah. And did you experience these masses as, this is my own curiosity here, as open public regular masses or focused on students? Or there was some of both, depending on where you were?
It was, I mean, it was very much like a public mass, but almost like a little like hat nod to like the fact that we're like on a college campus. So it was interesting because like the masses that were done out of the chapel, and if all you listeners out there, if you're ever in Boston, St. Mary's Hall on BC's campus, I think is one of the most beautiful chapels that I've ever been in my life. It's like was built at the turn of the century. It's like old stained glass.
Mhm.
That was an 8 a.m., 8:30 mass. So the community members that were coming in for that, we're talking like very old folks with headscarves, like, coming in and sitting down, like kneeling and standing at the right times. So it was almost like kind of old world in that way. But then if you were to go to, a service at St. Ignatius, you would have like the liturgical choir there that was from the
Mhm.
university showing up. So there was much more of like a campus feel, I think, for those services.
Right. So you graduate from that milieu, and then what happens to your faith life next, as far as the next context? Where do you go after that?
I completed my first year of master's studies in philosophy as a senior at BC.
Hmm.
As you indicated earlier, that didn't really open up many more job prospects for
Hmm.
me than,
Okay.
than when I was just a regular philosophy undergrad, right?
Oh, he's got a
So,
master's. Well, then absolutely.
right. That means there's just like less time I need to spend in PhD. It mean nothing really. So I kind of got frustrated, I think, with being in Boston and kind of and being in this homogenous kind of Catholic world that I'd always been in. So I decided to do something completely different. So I moved to Portland, Oregon, and went and worked in a garden center. It was amazing. Opposite side of the country,
Sure.
Portland is
Which garden center?
very what?
Which garden center?
Oh, the Hollywood Fred Meyer
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Central. I
Yeah.
worked at the Christmas tree lot. It was amazing.
Nice.
Because I used to work the ground. I also worked at St. Mary's Hall when I was at
Hmm.
BC. So maybe I should add that I was working for the Jesuits. So like I was tripping over priests like all the time. Like oftentimes I was at the mass in St. Mary's Hall because I needed to mop afterwards. So I'd be like in the back with the mop, like waiting for people to leave. So I was really looking forward at that point to just like kind of escaping all of that. Escaping kind of the academic circles, escaping kind of this theological, kind of heavy philosophical world. And I just wanted to go play with some plants, which was really good for me. But that was also, I think there was a sense that I had spent all this time like studying philosophy and theology, and I had like gotten to the end of all that. And then like the world didn't just like open up for me. So there was a little bit of resentment maybe that broke out at that point, and I kind of started stepping back from certainly from Catholicism. I wasn't really too terribly interested in continuing any of that at that point. And I mean, stepping away from the spiritual questions also quite a bit. And, looking back, that also falls just kind of a period of darkness in my life. A lot of desolation. Definitely, I think the dark night of the soul applies when I'm looking back at that, because I just became very wrapped up in my own suffering and almost like I don't want to say narcissistic sort of way, but just very
certainly solipsistic.
Solipsistic, I think is a great way to put it. And I just kind of reached a point where I was like, the God question is like, is God real? Is God not real? What does that mean in terms of like religion or faith? Like I just let that go. Because I was kind of more worried about like paying the bills on my expensive apartment in Portland and seeing how many breweries I could check out in a weekend. And, it's almost like sad to think about and look back on, but yeah, that was just where I was. I was like a young 20-year-old who had kind of burned out, I think, on some of these questions and just wanted to be where I was, which was, Portland, Oregon during the Portlandia days.
Where young people go to retire. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. That was you. Yeah. And nice. So what dragged you out of that?
Speaking of those breweries, there's a great line from the founder of AA, Bill W. He says that something along the lines of all addiction is a spiritual illness.
Mhm.
He really did conceptualize that, lack of connection to the universal, connection to deeper meaning is a source of a lot of the bad habits that we have with substances, relying on something outside of ourselves to fill an emptiness that is never going to get filled. I really fell into my substance use when I was living in Portland, particularly alcohol, to the point that I really hit rock bottom while I was there,
Mm.
and needed to, seek some help outside of myself to straighten all that out. Through that process of becoming sober, ultimately moving away from Portland, I started once again asking some of these questions of myself, like, okay, like I'm suffering, like I am hurting right now. Why?
Mhm.
What does it mean? This can't mean nothing.
Right.
And I think I was still feeling some aversion to Christianity at that point. I knew that there was like some deeper spiritual questions that I was starting to wrestle with. So I started participating in a recovery program called Recovery Dharma, and that is a Buddhist inspired approach to recovery. And what I initially really liked about that was just the mindfulness component. I really saw a lot of value in that, and so I kind of got deeper into that. But the other side of that mindfulness is after you've developed that internal stillness, that really creates a lot of space to enter into those deeper questions once again from a place of more stability and more of, I think, neutrality and a greater ability to have compassion for yourself and maybe things you believed in the past, and to have a more authentic response to what serves you in the here and now. So over time, through participating in Recovery Dharma and through getting sober, I started, thinking once again about growing up Catholic and what that meant to me. Thinking about the good that came of that, because it wasn't all, like, I think, you kind of sometimes develop these resentments and then you look back and you're like, oh, it was all bad.
Sure.
It was the opiate of the masses. They were trying to control me, right? But to slow down and kind of like I was describing earlier, think about just those true moments of connection that I had with a kid, with just other human beings who had a heart full of love, like for me and for their community. And a big part of that was the fact that they were Catholic and what that indicated in terms of their values. I think it was even during that time that I ran into you at the Newman Center at Boise State. Because I was starting to have, I was kind of just like, what are the Jesuits up to? Like, maybe I should pop my head in and maybe just see what's going on. And I remember you recommended Pima Chodron to me, actually, when things fall apart. I actually went and read that book and I was like, oh, see, like these Jesuits, they're still cool. Like
They're still not Catholic.
they're still welcoming, I can show up after being lapsed for several years and I'll still have a great conversation and not judge for it. So,
And hand you a Buddhist book.
right. But like, honestly, Jack, like it was little moments like that, with other Catholics and in Catholic spaces where I realized, like, oh, my whole values around like this kind of ecumenical idea is not exclusive. Like, reject Catholicism to also embrace that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as I was growing up as a young man, like that was I didn't have that clear in my head. Like I thought that, like, well, if I think that every religion has like a shred of truth, like that means that like I'm rejecting that, Catholicism is the right one. So like I can't be Catholic in that way.
Yeah.
And so like having these interactions as I kind of slowly, softly, returned, folks like you, like being willing to have those conversations and realize like, oh, this is like a safe conversation to have, really softened my heart and my ability, I think, to kind of return and accept my effort a lot more.
Yeah. Well, that's very gratifying to hear. That was the case. So you were in Boise, and then you then how did you get to Spokane, or how did you move?
So my brother, I think I mentioned earlier, he's 10 years younger than me, right? So when I went and left for school, he was still just a little kid.
Yeah.
He was like a little kid. And honestly, I went and left for school. I kind of got wrapped up in being a college student. And then I got wrapped up in living in Portland and kind of wrapped up in my own substance use. So I reached this point down the road where, my brother had like become an adult, essentially become a young man, and I didn't really know him. And also, things in Boise were kind of getting a little bit weird. There was just like a sense that I needed to return home. Like I wanted to return home to like be closer to my family, be closer to my brother, and also I think do some healing around like the sort of things that had me leaving Spokane, just kind of like, let's see how far away I can get sort of feeling. And also like I need to get away from my mom, all those sort of things. So yeah, I came back and, was still working on recovery stuff at that point. But after getting back up here, it's pretty funny. I think it was the week I moved back into my mom's basement. It was Saturday night. She was like, "So you coming to mass in the And I was just like,
oh God.
Sure. Yeah.
You're darn right. I am.
Go to mass in the morning. I'm not paying rent. You just fed me the last week. Yep. I'm going to mass in the morning.
Yes.
This is a good political move. So that's where it started. But, going back into, old St. Aloysius, is the same church that I was confirmed in, seeing my old high school teachers, seeing family friends that I hadn't seen in a long time. It was just that kind of just re-immersion suddenly in like my home life. But that really happened at mass. Like that was the moment where I was like, oh yeah, no, I'm back in town. Everybody knows I'm back in town now. Here I am, and I think beyond that, like having spent all this time, doing the whole, ecumenical kind of perspective and getting into Buddhism, returning, I think, to some of my theological thinking and philosophical thinking, just to sit there and hear the gospel read after having not heard the gospel for so long. And, people talk about this experience. You hear things being read from that old book and it just hits you. It like hits you in the here and now. And I would have that experience. I'd be sitting there and I'd be like, wow, that really speaks to what I'm going through. Wow, that really provides me some clarity on something I've been wrestling with. And it's this little phrase I tell myself, like there's nothing wrong with sitting there on Sunday and listening to a little bit of ancient wisdom, and I even say that to people who are really, who grew up Catholic, who have become really hostile towards it. Like, everybody jumps on Instagram and, looking for their Buddhist quote or their Alan Watts quote. And they're like, oh man, this feeds my soul. And it's like, well, for free, you can go sit for an hour and they'll read you, a bunch of ancient wisdom and you might get something out of it. So they have them in every major city in the United States. You don't have to go shopping.
It's incredible, really, what they've figured out. Yeah. Tell me what you do now for work.
Yeah. So I am a marriage and family therapist, as fate would have it. And I guess, I'll get into a little bit more of the specifics of it. So yeah, I did some social work for a little bit. COVID hit and I was suddenly just totally out of my element and unprepared and not educated enough to do that work. And so as I kind of grappled with the experience of COVID and kind of my own ineptitude,
inadequacies
in terms of like being able to help these people, I was like, oh, I should really go back to school and like learn how to actually help these people, because I really liked doing that work. So I went back to school and started studying marriage and family therapy up at Whitworth University, which was interesting. Whitworth is for those locally will know, but it's a kind of more conservative Christian institution. It's Presbyterian, I believe.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So when I got there, the way that they talk about, learning how to do therapy and just the therapeutic practice in general, there's a lot of faith language as we were learning, like very much talking about it from like kind of a Christian perspective, and arguably a Christian perspective that doesn't really align with how I relate to Christianity or questions of faith. It brought up for me a lot of my own, like, they would say something in class and I'd be like, well, I don't really believe that. I more believe this. And so like over time, it kind of edified for me what I really believe in terms of the place that spirituality has in the therapy space. So that's one side of it. I'm also did a my undergrad or my internship in neuropsych and biofeedback, particularly with the mind of learning how to take on some of these advanced trauma modalities to really address folks who have, a significant lived history of trauma, and having come from working with formerly homeless families, that was kind of the demographic that I work with. They all have a lot of trauma. As fate would have it, along the way, I started learning more about psychedelic assisted therapy, which is more of an emerging field. Essentially, what I mean by that is using either plant medicine or kind of synthetic psychedelics like LSD or ketamine to allow people to enter into deeply introspective states, sometimes transpersonal states, in a way that gives them new perspective on their trauma and allows them to heal and integrate those experiences in a more helpful way than they have in the past, so that we're not experiencing kind of that post-traumatic stress disorder. We're not having that constant reactivity, because there's more acceptance and connection and I think clarity around what one's own experience is. A big part of the psychedelic experience is kind of like I mentioned, the transpersonal aspects of it.
What does that mean?
So transpersonal, what I mean by that is really anything that goes beyond what I would say is kind of our physical experience of reality. So I'm talking about the metaphysical. I'm talking about, I guess I'll just get into it. I don't really talk about this in the therapy space too much. There is a massive theological component to the experiences that people have when they're psychedelics, which is interesting because as therapists, we are kind of taught to shy away from questions of religion, God, faith. It's kind of like sex, money, politics, religion. Those aren't really things for the therapy space necessarily, because those can be really triggering and kind of controversial. And so we want to kind of leave it alone. But what I found when I started working with folks doing psychedelic assisted therapy is these spiritual questions just are part of it. We're talking about people's deepest belief structures, how they make sense of the world and their meaning and themselves in it. Well, people's conception of God has a really big impact on all those things. And also people's conception of God is often linked to some of their earliest childhood experiences. So, the inner child holds a lot of power in that way and connection to that religious experience, the meaning making that exists there. So I wanted to get into psychedelic assisted therapy because, it's becoming very clear that's an incredibly powerful way to help people work through their trauma, particularly folks who have a difficult time in talk therapy spaces because of how re-triggering talking about these experiences can be. But very quickly, I found myself having deeply spiritual conversations with these folks.
Were you having those conversations from the standpoint of a therapist talking to someone? Yes. But also as someone who has had those experiences yourself?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's the other side of this is because psychedelic assisted therapy is such a new field and, training is very new in that. A lot of, honestly, some of the best ways to learn and to understand how to work with this medicine is to experience it yourself. So, some responsible self-experimentation.
I see.
When I first went back to go get my therapy degree, I was still very much in this agnostic space. I thought that, spirituality was really important. It's something that I would feel sometimes. It's something I made space for, but I didn't really feel like I needed to have like a firm answer to any of that. Like I was like, oh God, like maybe like, I think it's more important to be a good person and live a good life and, reap the fruits that come from that. And I guess we'll find out in the end, like what the truth of it all is. But in, doing some of these intentional experiences with psychedelics, I had an experience that really clarified a lot for me. It was in the woods. I was, just kind of casually enjoying the fire and nature and all those things and some mushrooms. By the way, this is all before I was a licensed therapist. I want to throw that out there.
Yeah, got it.
But there was just this moment where I just was kind of reflecting on just life and how life was good and how I was really grateful for all these things. And I just closed my eyes and I just had this experience of like the greatest, whitest light that I've ever seen in my life, and just warmth, like almost like penetrating, like the sun breaking through on a rainy day. And then a noise that sounded like a trumpet or a horn, but it was like, it almost felt like it contained like all these different sounds of the world, but in the same tone, like a dog barking and a baby crying and like a car horn, but it was all just kind of like in harmony. And it was just the briefest moment. It was like a second, as quick as it was to close my eyes and open them. I just turned to my partner who was sitting next to me, and I just was like, God is real. Like through my bones, I just knew in that moment, like I'd had the experience.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So many people describe it as this amazing, transcendent, moment with, I can see this crystal palace in the sky, or it's, oh, Jesus coming to me through my tears. For me, it was just the briefest moment, but there was just the certainty that came with that was unreal. I even remember just turning to her and being like, this feeling's never going to go away. And ever since then, I have just embraced the fact that, God is a very real part of my life.
How does that connect to Catholic practice for you? Like, you're like, okay, now I actually practice as a Catholic with a stronger base, or I've got it. I don't necessarily need a faulty delivery system, or,
So there's a really good warm fuzzy feeling of like, oh my gosh, I've stumbled onto like the truth. I've answered the big question that I've been like struggling with. And that felt really good. That felt really rewarding. And it's, so I guess my deconstruction's been a little bit different in this way, because it wasn't like I kind of deconstructed everything, got to the bottom and was like, oh, okay, like actually God is real. It was almost like I kind of started at the top, like, okay, God is real. Now you need to sort out all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So really, honestly, a lot of guilt and shame in the immediate aftermath of that experience, because I looked back at kind of the salafism, the kind of like nihilism light that I experienced as a young 20-year-old, the way that I lived my life through that time, kind of in willful ignorance of some of these questions. And I just felt sad and ashamed almost, like, wow, this was real. These things that you were taught as a kid, it's real. There's a truth to it all. And you kind of got an attitude about it and just kind of tried to buck it.
Yeah.
And so it's really, and I'm still really going through this phase of my life of trying to re-experience components of Catholicism and faith in general and spirituality in general from this new perspective of having like a much stronger sense of belief, going in once again, seeking out those Jesuits and trying to have some of those deeper conversations and kind of explain where I've been and where I've landed, and maybe how can I make sense of this now as an adult. Going to mass with my mom again.
Mm-hmm.
And, not only getting that, spiritual kind of component of like hearing the gospels or hearing a good homily, but, remembering maybe the deeper truth of what it was like as a young kid to just sit next to your mom and like have that shared moment. And the community that comes with it, and reflecting on, wow, like you kind of rejected all of that. This was happening every Sunday right here, and you just stayed away for whatever reason. So kind of almost sheepishly kind of like showing back up at mass after a while and being like, oh yeah, no, I'm back. Praise be everybody.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So I think that I've done a lot of work around that, honestly, like work in therapy, work in community, a lot of individual conversations. And, the funny thing is at the end of the day, if I think about the person of Jesus, or I think about the figure, the entity that is God, they don't care about my like wounded ego that like kept me away for however long. Like they were sitting there waiting.
Yeah, correct.
And I have to remind myself of that, I think I keep looking for some experience of like rejection or like being called out or like the finger being wagged at me for having, missed out on whatever, but it just hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And that's really allowed me to have some healing And I think also, to be frank, being fortunate enough to be in Spokane and to be connected to particularly the faith community at the university here, because it is a lot less of kind of that like dogmatic, like kind of more finger wagging sort of experience. It's college. There's a sense of like welcomeness and wanting people to come in who might be hesitant, right?
Yeah.
So that was really good. It actually reminds me of there's this beautiful scene at the beginning of Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton, where he's describing his return to faith as like somebody who like sets off sailing from the coast of England to go discover new lands and gets caught in a storm and then washes up on the shore and is so grateful for the shore and kisses the soil and, is so grateful for this new experience of like refuge and security, and then walks up the hill and realizes that, he's on the outskirts of London still.
Yeah.
He never left. It's the same shore, but just that experience of like leaving and having an intentional experience of leaving and then finding yourself back there almost with new, fresh eyes just has created a new experience of it for me.
That is so interesting to hear. And to hear that not only is it happening, but, you're broad-minded enough and intelligent enough and now experienced enough in the sense of being able to recognize what's going on when it's going on. That's just spectacular because, I think people have experiences and miss the meaning, and that's not happening at the moment. And who knows what's next, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of the other side of this is, the who knows what's next. This has also been quite a meditation in how easy it is to get lost and caught up and removed from all of this, because it didn't take much. It was kind of like death by 1,000 cuts, like a little thing here, a little thing there. And then suddenly, it's been a year since I've been to mass.
Yeah. Right. And why are you denying yourself that which gives you life?
Right.
It's classic dark spirit strategy.
No, totally. Just like how my computer cut out right as I was telling you about my conversion experience. Dark spirit.
The demons, they start with the computers.
The ghost in the machine.
That's how they do it. I am so grateful for you to take the time to talk to me. This has been great. To hear that your experience, and it's different than I thought it was going to be, actually. Even though we'd had a kind of a pre-conversation,
right.
Yeah,
that's really good. It's kind of been a crazy story, and I love it for that in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
because I don't think that I would have the insights or the appreciation if there weren't these kind of periods of removal and then return, and remembrance that went on along the way.
Yeah. Well, thank you,
and thank you. Like, honestly, like, I kind of alluded to, like, you're one of those people that kind of along the way was like, oh, hey, how's it going? You could, like, oh yeah, I know.
You could
There's
try.
Some pretty cool Catholics out there. Maybe I should go back to mass.
You could try this. Yeah. Excellent. Good. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you so much for listening to Catholics in Ordinary Time. If you like what you're hearing, please consider subscribing so you don't miss anything in the rest of the season. Also, please recommend this to friends and family. And if you're feeling up to it, please leave us a review. That makes all the difference. Again, thanks so much for listening.